The 2023 transfer portal cycle has concluded, for the most part. There are still some highly touted players out there, such as wide receiver Keon Coleman, who's entertaining nearly 60 schools, which is insane, but for the most part, there are just a handful of players left. 90% or more of those are not at the level Keon Coleman is at. In fact, a lot of those players will sadly not find another home at the Division I FBS level. They will have to travel down a level or two to play football at a D2, D3, maybe D1 FCS school. But for the most part, most players have found a new home. Their future moving forward in the sport of college football has been determined, and most Power 5 schools, most Big Ten schools, most FBS schools have their transfer portal recruiting classes completed. Most do. Not all. But since it's nearly over, I want to talk about it. And I want to talk about some schools that I think are winners in the portal, in the Big Ten specifically. Before we get any further, subscribe to the channel and join the awesome College Football with Sam community. Also hit the notification bell so you can get notified when I post new content. We will be doing a giveaway at 10,000 subscribers. That will be a huge mark for the channel. So please subscribe, like the video, and comment who you think the Big Ten's most impactful incoming transfer will be for the 2023 college football season. Without further ado, let's talk about the first of 5 transfer portal winners in the Big Ten. And the first is Iowa. Iowa's 2023 class saw a rebuilding of an offense that was poverty. And that's a very strong word, but it's rightfully used. Iowa was near the bottom of the country in points per game and yards per game on offense. And they somehow extended Brian Ferentz. Don't know how, but maybe it's because he was able to pull together this transfer portal class on offense. I doubt that's the case. It's probably more an example of nepotism, but whatever. That's probably for a different video. Iowa's 2023 class is a winner, though. They did lose a handful of players. They lost Arlen Bruce IV and Keegan Johnson from their wide receiver core. They also lost Justin Jacobs and Terry Roberts, a few defensive players, and Gavin Williams, a running back. However, what they lost in the transfer portal, they more than made up for by bringing in Cade McNamara and Eric All from Michigan, by bringing in Rusty Feth and Dejon Parker from lower-level schools, whether in the Group of 5 or FCS, Division II, etc., to rebuild and add depth to their offensive line. They added Nick Jackson, a great linebacker from Virginia. They also added Caleb Brown and Seth Anderson to their wide receiver core to replace the departures of Keegan Johnson and Arlen Bruce IV. Tied for top signee is tight end Eric All and wide receiver Caleb Brown. Caleb Brown was recruited by Ohio State in their 2022 recruiting class. He's been there for a year, did not see the field, but being developed by Brian Hartline for 1 year is a huge bonus. I think he's far and away going to be Iowa's best wide receiver, even as redshirt freshman coming into Iowa. He's going to be a difference maker. Same thing with tight end Eric All and quarterback Cade McNamara. Cade McNamara led Michigan to that 12-2, 8-1 in the Big Ten season in 2021, where they beat Ohio State for the first time in the Jim Harbaugh era, went on to win the Big Ten, and they reached the college football playoff, losing to national champion Georgia. In total, the Hawkeyes and Kirk Ferentz have 7 portal commits, 2 are 4 stars, 4 are 3 stars, and 1 is a 2-star. That being Seth Anderson. They added much needed depth and playmakers to an offense that was lacking in 2022, especially at wide receiver. Bringing in Nick Jackson is also huge because it offsets the departure of Justin Jacobs, who, while not a main starter or contributor, he still got playing time, and with Jack Campbell leaving to the NFL, where he was drafted by the Lions, they needed some more depth and playmakers at linebacker as well. So Iowa, they're still strong on defense, and they were already strong at tight end, but they shored up their weaknesses and even added to their strengths at tight end and defense as well. Now we have Nebraska. Nebraska has the number 5 transfer portal class in the Big Ten. Their best signee is quarterback Jeff Sims, who took over the starting quarterback job for Casey Thompson, who's currently in the transfer portal. And last I checked was looking at Florida Atlantic, where his former head coach at Texas, Tom Herman, is currently the head coach. Nebraska's class is interesting because they bring in 12 commits, but they did lose a decent amount. They lost a decent amount. They lost A.J. Allen to the portal, who committed to Miami. Lost Noah Pola Gates, who is one of their more highly recruited players. They lost Logan Smothers, Stephon Wynn. They lost Alante Brown, who is a high-ceiling kind of wide receiver. I mean, they added a lot of players. They had a good amount of roster turnover. I'll put it that way. They had a solid amount of roster turnover. But I think they're a winner here, not just because they got a new quarterback, but because from watching the spring game and just seeing their portal additions, they were able to, and time will tell, but they also rebuilt the defensive line. The key guy who helped in that, of course, was M.J. Sherman, a commit from Georgia, who was nearly a 5-star when he enrolled at the Georgia Bulldogs. In total, again, they have 12 portal commits. 2 are 4 stars, 8 are 3 stars, and 2 are 2 stars. Nebraska replaced its starting quarterback and center through the portal. Ben Scott is currently their projected starting center, and he came from Arizona State. They built depth at wide receiver and defensive line. They also got Jacob Hood coming in from Georgia as well. Eric Gilbert, who I don't think will be much of a factor. He was their highest rated signee, but I put Jeff Sims there instead because I don't think Gilbert's going to be much of a factor. Meanwhile, Jeff Sims could be one of the best quarterbacks in the Big Ten if he's developed properly with his fantastic athleticism. Going back to wide receiver, Billy Kemp transferred to Nebraska. You also had, of course, a player who was at Baylor in Josh Fleeks, at Baylor, by the way, when Matt Rule was there, and Isaiah Garcia Castaneda returned to the program, along with, and this isn't a transfer portal edition, but Xavier Betts. Xavier Betts is back at the school after being ineligible for the 2022 season. Some could argue that Nebraska was also a transfer portal loser because Ernest Hausman, their best player on defense by, I would say, a mile, transferred away to Michigan. But with what they've done at the D-line, and they returned a decent amount of experience at linebacker and defensive back, I think that Nebraska is in great shape. Another school that I think is similar to Nebraska in the transfer portal is Wisconsin. And I didn't include Wisconsin in this video because I want to make a whole video dedicated to Wisconsin that will include the transfer portal, include recruiting, and just talk about what I think about Wisconsin in 2023. Because I started out being actually very low on them when the news first broke about Luke Fickell, and they've been rising in my mind ever since. So I'm making a whole video dedicated to that. If you're a Badger fan and are interested, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Ohio State's 2023 class. They have the number 8 transfer portal class in the Big Ten, and the main focus of this transfer portal class, at least initially, was shoring up weakness. And the weakness after this past season was the secondary. And even recently, they've done that. So originally it was just Davis and Igbinosun, and it was Jihad Carter, who are a 94 and 93 respectively, 2 of the highest ranked secondary players and prospects who were in the 2023 transfer portal cycle. and Ohio State got him. Ohio State, in fact, beat out Davison Igbinosun. They beat Michigan out for Davison Igbinosun. Part of that was probably due to the fact that Michigan having a better secondary and having even more depth than they do now, because R.J. Moten and others entered the portal after this Michigan spring game. They had tons of depth. And Ohio State, while having depth as well, they don't have a Will Johnson at corner, and Denzel Burke had a down year. So if you're Davison Igbinosun, you go to Ohio State, you get great playing time. And now that there's been a little more attrition for both the Buckeyes and the Wolverines, I mean, as a Michigan fan here, I would much rather have Davison Igbinosun as my starting corner opposite of Will Johnson than Amorian Walker. Much rather. But we'll see how that goes. Regardless, Ohio State's secondary is in good position because of Igbinosun and Carter, and also because of Lorenzo Styles, who's a legacy recruit for the Buckeyes that went to Notre Dame as a wide receiver, but he wanted to play defensive back, and he was actually working out at defensive back for Notre Dame, and he's now an Ohio State Buckeye. So Ohio State has added 3 solid at worst, elite at best, secondary players. They'll have one of the best secondaries in the country, in my mind. Now, maybe that prediction will age like fine wine, or age like milk out in the sun in Columbia. We'll have to wait and see. The games tell the story of the teams and tell the story of the season. But overall, Ohio State has 7 portal commits, 3 are 4 stars, and so far in this video, that's the highest per Big Ten transfer portal winner team. 3 are 3 stars, 1 is a 2-star. Ohio State added several high upside players to its front 4 and back 5 on defense. They also built up the offensive line by adding Josh Simmons from San Diego State and Victor Cutler from Louisiana Monroe. But perhaps one of the more curious additions was Tyrone Malone. That might have been one of the more curious additions. 6'4", 300-pound defensive lineman, a top 90 player in the 2021 recruiting class. To me, that's fascinating. And the reason it's fascinating is because, A, he's only ranked as an 89, according to 24/7 Sports. He's dropped in ranking since being at Ole Miss, and he only had 10 tackles this season, 1 sack, 2 passes defended. And it's also curious because Ohio State's D-line, especially at D-tackle, and Malone's an interior D-lineman, is very deep. It's deep, but I wonder if Malone's high upside intrigued Larry Johnson and Jim Knowles, and Larry Johnson, although in the past few seasons hasn't shown this, before then, best developer in the nation by a mile at D-line. So it'll be very curious to see how he ends up doing at Ohio State. But number 8 portal class in the Big Ten, they made some additions recently which bumped up their numbers inside the top 50 for their overall class. I think they're an underrated winner, not just in the Big Ten, but nationally in their transfer portal class. Now we have Michigan. Michigan's 2023 class, I think, is the best in the Big Ten. It's the number 3 portal class in the Big Ten, but then you journey over to something that Georgia, Ohio State, and Alabama fans love to use for their high school recruiting, which is the average player rank. Michigan's average transfer portal commit is ranked at nearly a 91, which leads every other school in the Big Ten by around 2 whole points. It's pretty incredible. And it's not like they just have a handful of commits either, like 3, like what Georgia has. They only have 3 commits. All of them are 90s or higher. Michigan has 8. They have 8 total commits, nearly 10, all of which were to positions that outside of tight end were relatively strong, might I add you. Michigan's D-line, Michigan's linebacker core, Michigan's offensive line already was very strong and very deep. And Michigan just decided to add to those and then add to tight end because they lost Lewis Hansen and Eric All. So they just casually got A.J. Barner, a very solid tight end, to leave from Indiana and come to Michigan, along with his quarterback, Jack Tuttle. Michigan's top signee was Ernest Hausman, who played in the spring game. Number 2 player, according to 24/7 Sports, that entered the transfer portal, and he chose Michigan. And quarterback, tight end, D-line, linebacker were the areas that were targeted. Michigan had three incoming transfers on the offensive line. It's crazy. Drake Nugent, Miles Hinton coming from Stanford, Ladarius Henderson coming from Arizona State, all of whom 90 or higher rating, which is pretty incredible. I mean, Michigan's offensive line, I thought it was going to get better from 2021 to 2022. I didn't think toward the end of the 2022 season that it would be better than it was that season, which made me sad when we lost to TCU and when Michigan got even humiliated at times at the line of scrimmage in the TCU game. But then these transfers came in, and I'm thinking, especially since Drake Nugent was actually rated higher than Olguson Oluwatimi according to PFF, maybe this line can get even better. It's pretty crazy. Number 3 portal class in the Big Ten. They have 8 portal commits. 6 are 4-stars. 1 is a 3-star. 1 is a 2-star. And that 2-star is a recent commit. James Turner, who is actually from the state of Michigan. That was his birthplace. He is a Louisville kicker, or former Louisville kicker now Michigan Wolverine. He made 90% of his field goals in 2022, was 20 of 22, 11 of 11 from the 20-plus yard range, 6 of 6 from 30-plus, and 3 of 5 from 40-plus. He also made 97.4 of his extra points and was 31st nationally in total points. He's from Saline, Michigan, played for Louisville for, I think for 4 seasons, and now he's coming to Michigan to replace the outgoing Jake Moody, who is by far and away the nation's best kicker, drafted in the 3rd round, I believe, by the San Francisco 49ers. So Michigan, very solid transfer portal class, very selective, similarly to Ohio State and Georgia. The difference is Georgia only had 3 players, so it was even more selective. But when you recruit at the level they do, you can afford to be that way. Ohio State only had 1 less commit, but a lot of them were ranked lower. We'll see if those rankings were accurate come fall. But Michigan is similar to Ohio State in that they're not just a winner in the Big Ten, but they're a winner nationally. And I would think from a quality standpoint or from a fit standpoint, Michigan would be up in the top 10, top 5 if you looked at transfer portal classes and you factored in the number of commits, the average rank per player, and also positional needs for each team. Michigan would be close to the top, along with the likes of USC, LSU, Auburn, the teams that are really filling in all of their positional needs and are being geniuses with the portal. Some of you might say Colorado, but when you're replacing your whole roster, I don't know if that's insanity or if that's genius. We'll find out over the next few years if what Deion Sanders is doing is working. Last but not least, and if you're a Wisconsin fan, you're not on the list, but I again want to emphasize I'm dedicating a whole video to both the portal class, my expectations and thoughts for Wisconsin in 2023. It's going to be exciting. But the fellow Paul Bunyan Axe competitor, I guess is the best word, Minnesota. I watched their spring game today. And it would have taken me a while to watch their spring game because I'm, watching the teams that I think are going to be the best. Watching Minnesota's spring game really impressed me. And you got to see the transfers at work. Whether you got to see their highest rated transfer, their wide receiver, Elijah Spencer, whether you got to see him, whether you got to see Brevin Spanford, who isn't a transfer, but who's possibly one of the nation's best tight ends, very underrated player, or whether you got to see Sean Tyler, Sean Tyler is a running back from Western Michigan. Trayson Potts transferred to Penn State to add some depth there because outside of Singleton and Allen, if one of them got injured, they would not have a running back to replace him. Now they do in Trey Potts, so it's a great fit. Sean Tyler beat out Trey Potts. He ran for 1,027 yards in 2022, 7 touchdowns, averaged 4.9 yards per carry. He was on a bad Western Michigan team that went 5-7 and then fired its head coach after 2022. He also had 111 receiving yards and 1 receiving touchdown, and he averaged 9.3 yards per reception with a very long 76-yard reception, also a very long 63-yard rush. He's coming to a much better offensive line. He's going to be playing against much tougher defenses, but Minnesota's tackles are solid. The interior of their O-line, despite losing all 3 interior players, I think will do well. It'll be hard to replace John Michael Schmitz, but I don't know if they'll need to because their passing game, their pass pro, their tight ends, wide receivers, their skill players looked phenomenal. And that's what they did in the transfer portal alongside of defense. They targeted skill players. Sean Tyler, Corey Crooms. They targeted Elijah Spencer, who was their highest rated player. They also, through the transfer portal, they got a kicker in David Kemp, who I'm pretty sure he was the one that nailed all of those field goals in the spring game, which is a huge get. Minnesota special teams by efficiency metrics has not been good for years, and getting a very accurate kicker, especially given Minnesota's kind of offense, how it's historically been in the PJ Fleck era, where they love to ground and pound. I think that'll change some this year. But if you can be more accurate kicking, some of those 3-point field goals, they begin to add up at times if you can't get in the red zone. You don't want to be a team that has to get a touchdown or settle for nothing. While you do want to get in the end zone, it's good to have that medium there. And for a team like Minnesota, getting a kicker, I think, is huge. It can be the difference in a few games, especially since we know that Minnesota is a team that thrives playing in close games. And by thrives, I mean they play in a lot of close games. It's in their nature, just like the Big Ten West. They also got Jack Henderson and Ryan Selig. Those are some 3-star defensive players that they got. They also had Rowan Zolman, a safety transfer in, and some others as well. Number 9 transfer portal class in the Big Ten. 10 portal commits. 1 is a 4-star, 5 or 3 stars, 1 is a 2-star. 3 are currently unranked. The kicker I mentioned currently is unranked. He hasn't been ranked yet. Minnesota added a great playmaker to the wide receiver room. Actually, more than a great playmaker. Several, because Corey Crooms as well as Elijah Spencer came into the wide receiver room. And they replaced Muhammad Ibrahim. So I think when you replace Muhammad Ibrahim, I'm not saying he'll fill in, not saying Sean Tyler will be that good, but I'm saying that if you look at Minnesota's depth chart, you now have an even deeper running back room, an extremely deep running back room. And Ethan Kaliakmanis, Cole Kramer, that's an intriguing quarterback battle. And I know that compared to the other teams, I'm kind of going off and just talking about Minnesota football and not just the portal. But that's because after watching the spring game, looking at the transfer portal class, I mean, Chris Altman-Bell, Daniel Jackson, Corey Crooms, Lameka Brockington, Elijah Spencer, that's a deep wide receiver room. They could legitimately go 5 wide, and they have one of the better receiver rooms in the country. Mostly from development, not even from recruiting, but more so development and recruiting guys who were diamonds in the rough. They can go 5 wide with those wide receivers, and all of those 5 that would be on the field would be solid playmakers. Brevin Spanford as well. You have a solid option at tight end, redshirt senior who decided to return. And I'm telling you, the biggest question for this team is going to be the interior of the offensive line, which they did not replace or target via the portal. And they did some of that last year with Chuck Filiega. So that tells me that PJ Fleck and Minnesota are confident about that offensive line. So along with Wisconsin, I think I'm going to make a video on Minnesota in the near future as well, because Minnesota is a team that after watching the spring game and doing a little bit of research, I'm higher on than I was. In fact, I'm much higher on them. Not top 10, top 15, anything like that, but I think they'll be an intriguing story to follow, especially given the fact they have to play both Michigan and Ohio State on their schedule. Thank you guys for watching. If you liked the video, make sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts down below. Outside of Wisconsin, who I've already talked about that I'm going to make another video, if you think I missed a Big Ten team who won the transfer portal, let me know in the comments below, please, and we'll talk about it. Have a great day, guys.